Hello and welcome to the London Stock Exchange's panel here at the London Games Festival. I'm Shah from the LSE, and we're gathered here with some of the biggest names in the games industry to discuss all things relating to the business of video games. We've got a great panel here, and I'm going to start off by allowing everyone to introduce themselves and tell us what is the greatest game of all time. Dominic, perhaps we can start with you.
I'm Dominic Wheatley. I started a games company in 1985. It was actually called Dome Up, became known as IDOS, famous, of course, for Tomb Raider and other games like that. I now run a company called Catalis, which is Curve Digital, which is games, and Testronic, which is outsourcing QA company. Best game in the world, Championship Manager. Many people failed their O-levels and A-levels as a result of it. But I think that's the best game we ever produced.
And how about you, Brian?
So I'm Brian Chadwick from Devolver Digital, and I'm a lawyer. So I've had a career in games for quite some time. So I was the general counsel and director of a little mobile company called Miniclip, which I was there for many years. Then we sold it to Tencent, and kind of came back into law now with Devolver. So with Devolver, we'll talk about this, just done our IPO a few months ago. The greatest game in the world for me. So I've never been a heavy console player because I come from mobile. So I'm a lover of art, and I do love Devolver's game Gris, which is kind of like watching a movie for me. It's a very beautiful game.
Thank you. Ranjani?
It's hard to follow on from that, I do have to say. So I'm Ranjani. I'm Chief Operating Officer of a business development consultancy called Robot Teddy. We work with games like Among Us and Gang Beasts and Superhot. We help them make lots of money, think about strategy, and think about feature roadmaps and release management and things like that. We recently got acquired by a Swedish company called Thunderful, and we're starting a few funds for the games industry, a prototype fund and a VR fund. So I'm quite excited about that. I think the greatest game of all time is probably The Curse of Monkey Island. It's a LucasArts game, and it's point and click, a genre that's increasingly hard to find good games in nowadays. And it's the funniest game ever. If you haven't played it, you absolutely have to.
Thanks, Ranjani. Surian.
Hello, I'm Ian Livingstone. I'm currently a general partner at Hiro Capital, a VC fund supporting video games and games technology. I've been in the games industry 47 years since co-founding Games Workshop in 1975. Wrote a series of interactive books in the 80s called Fighting Fantasy. Sold 20 million copies globally. I was also chairman of IDOS during the glory years with Dominic, and I became an angel investor after leaving IDOS, and then was appointed chairman of Sumo Group, which was acquired by Tencent last month. But I'm currently heavily involved in Hiro Capital. And last but not least, my favorite game is, I think it's hard to say that because I've got 4 kids. It's like saying what's my favorite child. It's impossible to say. But, and if I say a video game, I'm going to really be, hell.
You're going to have people calling you out.
It's going to be terrible. So I can't show any sort of prejudice or favoritism. So I'm going to say chess because it's the ultimate game. You will never ever master chess, and it can always keep you engaged. It's an abstract game. I tend to like thematic games, but I think chess is so pure, it has to be the #1 game, and that's how I get out of jail free.
Love it. And can you play that on the tabletop or online?
I play it actually online. There's several great chess apps, and so I play with friends all around the world.
Thank you. And Richard?
Hi, Richard Darlington. I'm actually a banker, so not technically in the gaming industry, but I do head up the gaming division at Zeus Capital. I've had the pleasure of working with people like Sumo and Catalis and Tiny Build, and recently Devolver over the last 3 or 4 years. So been a relative newbie to the whole sector, but really been a great ride. In terms of best game, it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but the first game I ever bought on console was Grand Theft Auto, and it's still one that I still even play today as a game that's just crossed so many different mediums, and I think it's one that's probably bridged a lot of people into the gaming industry over the last few years. It's a big kind of cultural phenomenon, that one.
And you're still on the 2D version of Grand Theft Auto?
All of them.
Love it. Surian, you've been involved in the physical games world, the online games world, and now the virtual games world. How have you seen the market evolve during those 47 years?
Well, clearly in 1975 there wasn't really a games market, but it's incredible how it's grown now to some $200 billion a year industry, 3 billion people playing, millions of people coming on stream every day. And the amazing thing about the games industry, it grows because of advances in technology. Other entertainment media technology tends to substitute previous revenues, whereas in the games industry, everything is additive. So every time there's a new piece of technology or platform, it's all additive to the experience. In the early days, PCs and basic consoles, and then along comes Apple seeing an opportunity to extend the market by creating the touch screen, and created a new casual games player with a very convenient app store with all you can eat easy accessibility. And then you see AR and VR comes along again, all additive, and you see people want to start watching games with esports to increase the ecosystem even more, because everyone wants to see best-in-class people playing games. And now we're talking about the metaverse, this new virtual worlds, persistent worlds where people can not just play but hang out together, transact, and perhaps earn going forward. So it's an incredible industry that's going to continue to expand. And of course it speaks to Generation Z. They interact with everything they do consume vast amounts of social media through their devices, and guess what? They want their entertainment to be interactive because it gives them agency, and that's what Generation Z want, is that control and agency.
It's hard to disagree with that. And Dominic, when we were chatting outside, you mentioned that Ian gave you your first 10 grand to get, I guess, some of your initial ventures off the ground.
Well, yeah, in 1985, my brother had bought a Commodore 64, and I saw it, and then we played a game called Heroes of Khan, and it was fantastic. So I left my job in advertising and with a mate, and we started above a shop in Fulham. And someone, in fact, Dave Bishop, I think, actually introduced me to Ian. So I went along because we had we were fundraising, and I went to see Ian, and I remember seeing this lovely red Porsche outside his office. I thought, God, this is amazing. And I went up to, and there he was, and he was really laid back. He was all sitting back there. In those days, he had a lot of hair, actually. So, I'm looking at it now. I can see it was quite big, bushy hair. And he, anyway, I gave him a pitch, and he got his checkbook out, and he went, all right, here's 10,000 quid. I went, okay, that was in the hat. And anyway, we went on to become great friends. And actually, of course, he was my chairman at Eidos, and it was a glory days. We had a lot of fun.
And do you think it's easier or harder now if you're starting out in the industry?
Oh gosh, that's a difficult one, because when I was 25, started my own business back in the 80s, everyone thought I was precocious. Now, if you haven't started a business by the time you're 25, you're trailing way behind. In fact, my daughter's boyfriend is 20 years old, and he's already raised £2 million for seed capital for his app idea. I mean, it's astonishing. So in some senses, it's a lot easier, right? In other senses, it's not, because it's so competitive and coming up with new ideas and so on. But I mean, if you did want to get into the games business, particularly from the development standpoint, then clearly, if you can get a publisher to back you, to provide effectively the seed capital, and then you make that game successful, that's a great way in. It's not easy, but that's how most people do get into the industry.
Fascinating. Ranjani, we're talking about if you're starting out developing a game, you've got a prototype. It could be the next version of Wordle, right? How do you get that distributed far and wide? How do you raise money? Dominic's raised an interesting point. There are some publishers there. There's angels like Surian, but what are the other ways of getting it off the ground?
That's such an interesting question. Like Dominic was saying, it is both easier and harder to get money these days to start a company. There's obviously so many IPOs and publishers in this room. There's the funds that we are starting. But the DCMS has recently introduced a £50 million fund, of which games got about 8 million. So, we do have some ground to gain there compared to the film industry. But I think the UK has recognized that games are not just a capitalist product generic to the world, but there is a genuine British games industry, and games have a British identity that need to be fostered and nurtured. There are prototype funds from the UK government. So there's the UK Games Fund that I've just mentioned. There's obviously our prototype fund that we've just begun, because we've noticed that the same people who have the same contacts in the different platforms and the different publishers tend to get the same amount of money. So our fund is basically about finding new people and new ideas, both from the UK and from around the world. Each country has its own, governmental fund. Canada has one, Australia has one, the UK proudly has one, and I think those are the main avenues really for initial prototypes. For actually having a vertical slice that you can publish, there's platforms like Microsoft and Sony. They have indie funds. There's Game Pass, obviously, which wants to increase its ever-increasing catalog and wants to pay a license fee to get your game to launch on there. There's a bunch of different smaller platforms coming up that like key buyouts and things like that. So there's lots of different ways to get money, but I think, like Dominic was saying, basically it's hard to know where to start, and especially if you've got just a prototype rather than an actual game that you can pitch to people. So it is an interesting landscape at the moment.
Well, we just love the level of innovation that's happening in the sector, and it's great to have so many fascinating companies in the room. Dominic, Eidos was on our market, Games Workshop, Ian, as well as Sumo were on the market for a long time, and Brian, welcome. We're so delighted to have Devolver at London Stock Exchange. Tell us about that journey, and why does $1 billion business from Austin, Texas choose London to do the IPO? Was that always part of the plan?
Well, no, it wasn't always part of the plan, but Devolver is, most of our people are in kind of spread across about 22 countries. So we have boots on the ground, about 22 countries. And about a third of those people are in the UK. So we have 60 plus people in the UK. So Devolver operates on a London time zone. So we're GMT, kind of London-centric global business. So with all that, we then, over the last 12 years or so, Devolver has continued to kind of have great success and do really well. And recently we found ourselves being one of, if not the, kind of leading indie game publisher globally. So that attracted, a kind of unwanted interest, if you like, from top-tier private equity funds, from investment banks, from the large game, vast game publishers, everyone who had a different vision for what Devolver's future should be. So we did a lot of work internally. We began looking at who we are, thinking about what our journey is, and we discovered that the uniqueness of Devolver, like the true magic of it, is the culture, is the people. And it's sort of cliche to say that, but in Devolver's case, it really is. So we took advice from people like Zeus Capital and others, and began to really look at what are ways that we could protect our tribe, protect our culture. And for us, the IPO was as defensive as much as the normal kind of cliche of being a catalyst for growth. So we looked at all the various markets around the world. We had the benefit of being able to look at the USA, to look at Asia, to look at Sweden, to look at the UK. We did a lot of hard work at interviewing NASDAQ and interviewing, sort of NASDAQ North in Sweden and so forth. And we began to look at what was going to be the best place for us. And it was AIM. And it was AIM because the UK has a very intelligent investor base. There are institutional and kind of investor shareholders here who understand the nuances of publishing. And our predecessors and our colleagues, people like Team 17 and others, have really paved the way for us. We saw that the liquidity was going to be here ultimately with investors who knew what they were doing, the market, and people like Zeus who kind of shepherd us through the process of finding these really terrific investors to launch so that we could take control of our future. And ultimately, if we were looking to protect our tribe, if you like, our culture, it was about employees. So the AIM market for us it gives a good incentive to protect employees. It gives us share options. It gives us ultimate liquidity. It gives us a way, we had the 5 acquisitions leading up to the IPO, so it's quite a busy time of doing 5 acquisitions and an IPO all in the same 6-month period. And that also then makes the story more interesting, making us a listed business. So for us, the listing is actually not any kind of result or any kind of aim or target. It was actually the very beginning of a journey. So we still have quite a lot to go.
Great, thank you, Brian. Good way to bring Richard into the conversation. So,
thank you, Brian.
Richard, we've touched on angel investing and getting games up to critical mass. Where do you go from there? And talk us through how you raise capital from professional investors, venture capital, private equity, and eventually public investors as well.
It's interesting. I think back to when I first started kind of covering the industry probably 4 or 5 years ago, and it was actually with the Sumo team when they were looking at options around their secondary buyout, and the conversations I was having with even the mid-market private equity guys then, video games were just perceived as kind of hit-driven, or people didn't necessarily understand the business models that had evolved over the last few years, and this transition to digital distribution has massively changed investor sentiment towards how you can generate returns in the market now. And so the environment is just completely different to where it was 4 years ago, and it changes every year. The conversations I'm having with early stage mid-market private equity investors, they are very, very keen to get into all different aspects of gaming, be it development, publishing, services. There's an investor for all of those. I think in order to tap into that though, the one thing I'd say, or the piece of advice I'd give to anyone is just preparation is the key thing. It's just getting your ducks in a row and understanding what your proposition is, so that you can articulate that in the best way and actually run a tight process. Because one of the key things that I find as an issue, and it can become a distraction to a management team. So having that just putting it in a box in a way and just being able to kind of silo that work stream is a really important thing. So and just having that network and speaking to people and being able to, the investors are out there looking to deploy capital into this sector right now. I think finding capital shouldn't be an issue. It's making sure you present yourself in the best possible way is the key thing, and obviously that's kind of a big advert for myself to help with that. But Ian may equally say, well, actually it's better to kind of just have a bilateral conversation and get to know the personalities. But I think having you as a team needs to understand where do you want to get to in 5 years, and being able to then get people on board with that is the key message, I think.
There's an obsession with unicorns here in the UK right now, and as much as we love unicorns and decacorns and centacorns, look, we're proud that you don't need to be one to list in London. When do you all think is the right time to start thinking about an IPO? And there's a traditional IPO, but there's also other ways. Perhaps we could start with Sirian on that.
I mean, there's many ways to scale. I mean, you can go the private equity route, but that involves selling out completely. Obviously, you get some sweat equity back, but if you want to raise significant capital and retain control, obviously an IPO is a great way to do it. The thing is now that a lot of people are coming to the UK market, which is great, and we see there's an appetite for those stocks now because the perception of games has changed completely. As Richard said, the risk profile has changed from a box product sold at a premium price, having to navigate the supply chain to end up on a shelf for a limited number of time, depending on the retailer, ultimately to get to consumer. And if that box product wasn't as good as everyone thought it was, it'd all come back in way of returns, impact cash flow, and impact profitability. Fast forward to today, free at the point of delivery, serving a global audience, whatever platform you choose, whether it's mobile phone, digital console, PC, everyone can see now this is a much better business model. They're also seeing in the press like the biggest transaction Microsoft ever done in their lives is to acquire Activision and Blizzard for $70 billion. That's an amazing deal, and it's vindication of how this industry has really come of age. And therefore, going the IPO route is a very opportune moment, I think, for industries in our industry to actually realise full value. I think the games industry has always been undervalued, and now we're seeing a lot of capital coming into this space, which is fantastic all round.
Great. Dominic, Brian, would you agree with some of those comments? Any other views?
Well, I think your point about moving from box to digital is absolutely on the money. I think Eidos was the last big British games company before it fell into the arms of the Japanese, Square Enix. And there hasn't been anybody really since, because boxes are so expensive and difficult to maneuver relative to digital. And in the advent of digital, suddenly people again were able to make games in their spare room or whatever at home and find a publisher and come to market. And digital publishers like Devolver, somebody Team 17 has been there a long time, so they're sort of recently sort of into the digital side. But Curve, obviously our company, these have been able to flourish under this new delivery system, and that has really opened up the market to the Brits, because the investment community in the UK were just not prepared. They didn't have the appetite for the risk of box. So you had Ubisoft, of course, dominated Europe pretty much, and Koch Media to some extent in Germany. And then, of course, all the Americans and the Japanese publishers. They had the big bucks. They were multi-billion-dollar companies, huge amounts of cash, and they could afford to take those bets and lose a few. And just and I think, in a sense, it's very similar to a lot of the other big tech companies that have come out of the US and not so much in the UK. It's a little bit of a hangover, I think, in the British investor mentality, which was all about, they were back at pizza chain, no problem at all. They understand what that is, but as soon as it comes to things that involved in social media or new tech and that, it's all a bit frightening. But the new generation of fund managers, they're much more clued up, really, and therefore you've got wider understanding. And so the time now is for the Brits to really do what, the Brits have been making games which everyone else has published, right? All the money's gone over there, right? So, I was chairman of Coogee, we had 350 people making games for Nintendo, right? And other companies like that. We didn't get to keep much of the money. Now, we can, and we can create more jobs, well-paid, fun, creative jobs for the UK. I think it's absolutely fantastic.
And I would pick up on something that Surian said with the fair value or the truer value. Certainly for Devolver, when we were looking at the 12-month run-in before the IPO, and we had interest from private equity and investment banks and institutional and large games companies, there was a tension as to what the value would be and what we felt if they wanted to take our future and how we wanted to protect our future and protect our employees and our culture, what that was worth, if you like, and what that kind of value was worth. And we knew that being on the exchange and keeping control of our future, keeping control of our destiny, the market would give us that fair value. So we kind of ended the conversation in a way by doing that. But the question you asked about when is the right time for IPO, having been kind of a venture capital lawyer for a long time before kind of joining Devolver, I was always somewhat skeptical of people whose purpose was an IPO. So you meet people who were setting up a new company and they said, okay, I'm going to fundraise ABC and then IPO here. Like, it was all kind of programmed in their own minds. And to my mind, it never really served the purpose of the IPO, looking to find out what it actually, does it help the company? Is it good for their business, rather than the IPO for the sake of it? So I would counsel that the right time for the IPO is a very individual thing. It's a very, looking at what's right for your company. Does it make sense for you? If you have a nice position where you have options available to you, then to consider each of those. Think, actually, does PE make more sense to us? Does partial sale make more sense to us? At Miniclip, we sold most of our business to Tencent, and that helped catapult our business. That made the most sense for us. Because we were also offered IPO opportunities, but we turned them down. It didn't make sense for us.
I'd probably say, having IPO'd a couple of businesses in my time, that take a slightly different approach to it. If you're ready for an IPO, you're ready for anything. And so actually, the earlier that you can kind of instill some of the rigor around the financial reporting and the controls, that's almost seen as the pinnacle of business operations, to be ready to be public. So if you can start to build that into your model sooner, one of the things I often encounter when I'm working with businesses looking at options, whether it's private equity or trade or IPO, whatever it might be, is it's actually the cultural shift towards moving from founder management or private ownership into the kind of public life. And a lot of that is driven by just reporting and the some of the things that people don't think about. A lot of people think about an IPO as being super glamorous and you get the big day at the stock exchange and it's all great. But actually, that's the start of the journey. It's actually that going forward, you've got a slightly different way of looking at your internal business process and whatever. And that needs to be signed off and approved. So if you're ready for an IPO, actually, that could be a way to maximise value on any route. And so I would say, if it's even a consideration for you to generate a capital event at some point, speak to someone about how you can start to aim towards that earlier rather than 3 months before you decide that you want to pull the trigger on it, because that cultural thing, you can't stress how important that is to recognise it sooner rather than later.
It's all a question of being investor ready, isn't it?
Yes.
At scale, to have the right non-execs on board who are city-facing,
100%.
understand governance and reporting at that kind of detail. So it's obviously important for the company about to IPO to get that in place, but all the way down to when you first started off in games industry, of being investor ready, a lot of creative people don't know how to present to investors, and a lot of investors don't understand our space because they don't understand what a good game looks like. and is it going to be viable over time? Is this a good team or a bad time? It's very difficult. But as a games company, I remember when we started off Games Workshop in 1975, we just went to the bank manager and said, got this great game, it's a game, a role-playing game, you kill monsters, you find treasure, you go these fantastic journeys of the mind. And he looked at me rather like a dog watching television, had no understanding whatsoever what you were talking about, and asked us to leave quite quickly. And so we were obliged to live in the van for 3 months. But that was really our fault, because we weren't presenting in a way that was investable. So it's a question of the game industry understanding how to present, and the investor community understand what makes a good game. Because after all, we've got intangible assets. We don't have bricks and mortar to offer security. Our assets are our people and the content that we create. And it's a question of getting those two areas, the investors and the games makers, to understand each other's worlds. I think is so important and missing in a lot of areas.
Just to add a different perspective to that, like from the industry rather than from a company, of why are there IPOs in an industry and at what time does that actually happen? I think the video games industry is like a Pokemon evolving into its next form, because we've come out of the bedrooms, as Dominic was saying, and we've got creators who are formal companies now releasing multi-billion-dollar budget games. We've got smaller grassroots initiatives to introduce new people and new ideas into the games industry, and I think the amount of money flowing within it is now a good indication that it is a strong industry here to stay for a while. With the pandemic and introducing games to non-gamers, I think before we started filming, we were talking about Wordle and how much everybody was playing it, and nobody understands that your grandmother who's playing Wordle on your smartphone is also a gamer. Now, this is a household word, a game, and the lay investor, not just a specialist investor who is a private equity firm or who is a publisher looking for new ideas and new content, a lay investor understands that a game is a successful, marketable thing and a good investment. And an IPO is clearly the best way to bring the most diverse and international audience to your game. London being one of the best stock exchanges to list on.
Thank you.
Yes, exactly. But I think this is genuinely a heartening sign that we've not just professionalized, but I think like we've just evolved into the next phase of this is a booming industry and money is flowing into it in terms not just of games selling, but people seeing that this is just grounds for exponential growth.
I think it's also important that the LSE is actually understanding the games industry a lot more, and that's why people are choosing to move, because historically the LSE is around dividends and EBIT rather than growth, and video games is a growth industry. They're building audiences which they'll monetize at scale, and so I think there's a better understanding of that opportunity. But we need more perception that's positive around the industry. We're the most creative nation in the world. Look at our film, fashion, music, publishing, of course our games. And you put creativity in the hands of a tech-rich nation, which we are, hey presto, video games. And if you're looking for an industry that ticks all the right boxes for the post-pandemic world and the digital economy, it's high-tech, high-growth, intellectual property creating, export-focused. On day one, 90% of the sales are overseas to whatever digital console or device you go to. It's regional. It's not dependent on being in London. There's an awful lot to like about this industry. So we need some of the senior ministers and governmental people to be standing outside or inside a game studio for that photo opportunity, rather than standing outside a widget factory with a high-vis jacket and a hard hat for that photo opportunity for an industry which probably is not going to generate anything like the number of revenue or EBIT in what it's doing compared to a video games company. I was an angel investor in Playdemic in Wilmslow. They created one game called Golf Clash, free at the point of delivery, upselling content, generating $200 million a year, probably 100 million EBIT from one game. There's not many industries that can generate that kind of revenue per employee. And yet no one really talks about these games industry. And outside of the industry, no one talks about the people in it. So we need to really raise the profile and understand this is a great British success story. And the more we can see that growth without having to sell out to overseas publishers and media owners, get them further up the value chain of IP ownership, ultimately onto the IPO on the LSE, Happy days for the UK, and happy days for the games industry.
I just want to add to that. The games industry, I was finding again while I was sort of still in law, it was a Trojan horse for other technologies. So I think Richard touched on it earlier about where a games industry can help promote the increase in chip capacity, how server space is used and managed and stored, how kind of alternative energy sources. Like Devolver, we were attempting to champion with the London Stock Exchange to have more women on our board, but we had to fight to push that diversity, if you like. And the games industry now has the profile, the resources, the wealth, and also the growing clout, if you like, to say we can help push agendas for fuel consumption. We can push agendas for things where games industry requires huge amounts of power, if you like. But by the same token, it's different kinds of power. And I think, as Sir Ian's saying, on regional development, it doesn't necessarily need to have a concentration in one particular area. It could be really anywhere. It can be because it's a light business in the sense of good Wi-Fi connection, couple of laptops, and kind of off you go. So the games industry has that potential of pushing these kinds of other things.
Yeah, and I have to agree with that. I've never been as excited as I am now about what all of you are doing in the industry today, but also the opportunity. In a past life, I helped Candy Crush go public, and that at the time there probably was no option but to go to New York. But there's many more options today. And as I think about what we need to do to build our own Activisions or EAs. Expanding on some of the points that you raised, Ian, is there anything else that you think will be incredibly helpful across the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think just go back to sort of how you get to the next stage after your sort of seed capital and you've perhaps had a successful game or two or three and you're looking to expand it. I'm not certain that private equity isn't a good next step for a number of reasons. One, private equity is a very different beast these days than it used to be. It's not just an asset stripping outfit as they always used to be, and I find them to be much better than venture capitalists actually. So they come in at a later stage, typically into a company, and they're a bit more sort of grown up, and they do sort out your governance. They do get you straight on remuneration committees and audit committees and all the things that you need to have good governance in a company. So in a way, they prepare you potentially, if you're not corporate minded. For that potential IPO going forward. They can offer, of course, to fund you and help you grow to the next stage before you move to an IPO. And they can also allow sweet equity programs that really do align senior staff, particularly, well, all staff, but particularly the senior staff who might not have ownership in the company because they weren't the founder, with a real potential to be rewarded on a successful IPO or disposal going forward. So I certainly wouldn't. Well, I've got two private equity investors on my company, and they're great. They're absolutely fantastic. One is called Vesper Capital, the other is called North Edge. Very good friends of Zeus, and they really are incredibly helpful. So that's the first point. The second point is actually that the IPO route is great when you're sort of really of a good size. I reckon you've got to be 100 million revenue plus before you really think about going on an IPO. So be aware of that piece, and that's quite a hurdle to get up to if you're a young company. And finally, what we need to see is people like Sumo, all right, and indeed Codemasters, not necessarily sell completely to Japanese and American companies that come and take them for $1 billion. I think we need to see our own Activisions in the UK. So my plea would be for the next big company not to sell out to the big check.
I'm going to challenge you on one thing, Dominic, which is just on the size point, right? Yeah. So Tiny Build was about $35 million of revenue.
I think it's dropped through profit, but ultimately it's growth as well. It's the ability to demonstrate back catalogue diversity. There's a whole number of things that you can kind of look at. It doesn't necessarily need to be 100 million revenue. I think it's quite. You can't put a financial metric on it. I think to get to the next UK EA or Activision, you need a management team that wants to create it, and actually someone that wants to take that capital from people. I think the capital's there if you've got the idea at the moment, and having. You've got your milestones. You need to get through it. But there are people that are willing to fund big bets in this industry at the moment. There's a lot of people that have made a lot of money out of it. So the opportunity to put 100 million, 200 million, even more of capital to use, if it's not going out the door, if it's actually going into the business, but with a very clear, again, back to that original point, what's your aspiration in 5 years? And win hearts and minds of the investors. There'll be people there to back you along that journey.
And it's not just a question of PE being better than VC,
Yeah.
Dominic. I would say it's all part of an ecosystem that accelerates growth. You start with friends and family, then you might get some help from government, from SEIS and EIS investment, which is very tax advantageous, personal investing. Then you get angel investors on board, then accelerate the growth, and then they hand it over to VC, which are going to be fully aligned with whoever they invest in, as we do at Hiro. We're obviously, in it for the same reason. We're both looking to be rewarded by success of the company. There's no conflict. And then there's the handover to private equity and ultimately to IPO. So it's all part of retaining ownership of the content that's been created rather than have to sell off along the way. And regarding Sumo, I mean, it's the shareholders who decide. It's not the board.
It'd be lovely if they didn't have to or didn't want to. That's all.
Yeah, and if you want to retain ownership, the London Stock Exchange will say, well, no, we'll buy it, we'll keep it on market here, we'll make an even bigger bid. So it's access to scale, capital at scale, and that's always been missing in the UK. That's why the Americans, in particular, are always able to trump, and now China and sometimes Japan. It's having bigger bets placed here to retain the IP ownership.
Richard, how do you find these investors willing to place big bets in the sector?
Well, in public markets, private, or just generally?
Across the board.
I think as I say, there's the investors are out there. They're actively looking. I think once you get to a certain size, I'd be amazed if you're not getting people knocking at the door trying to get in. It's just how you articulate the story. I think is the key thing. Obviously get a good advisor. That's obviously a very if you know any, they can kind of run that process for you, and that is, I can't stress enough, kind of competitive tension as well, to be able to actually retain ownership of the process and know that you're getting what is a good price for the business. But I think it all depends upon what your aspirations are, again, in terms of where you are in that journey. Do you see this as a 20-year play? Is it something that you see as you want to kind of get it to a certain scale and exit and sell to a trade in the future? I think you've got to know what you want and then kind of position your business accordingly, I think.
And when you meet some of those investors, it's very telling to see the kinds of questions they ask you. So it was the experience of our kind of management team when they were working with Richard and Zeus and others that many of the UK investors or potential investors asked insightful, intelligent, nuanced questions. And potential investors in other parts of the world didn't. And it was a clear indicator of their understanding of our publishing business or publishing games generally, rather than
Which side of the world? Which part of the world didn't?
well, part of the world maybe where my accent comes from, or that sort of thing.
It's culturally, I think the US is very much focused on the big IP plays and the huge bets, whereas actually the diversity offered by the gaming. If you look at the people on the market at the moment, Team 17, yourselves, Tiny Build, it's that diverse back catalogue actually that really resonates with the investors, and it's the ability to generate money in your sleep without having to necessarily redeploy capital into just producing the next iteration of a kind of free to play game. It's these games, because of the way the indie market is operating, they're evergreen. They're able to just, there's a new generation of people playing Devolver's games or Curb's games every year coming through, and they're not tied to the technology of the day. They're actually tied to really good game mechanics, and I think UK investors really like that. That's not to say they wouldn't also love to get access to one of these bigger operators and a mobile developer, for example. That would be, I think there's a huge gap in the market at the moment for a large mobile operator to come into the UK, for example.
Your point about the back catalogue is actually very germane, because in the old days with Box, once it had gone off the shelf, it never went back on it. You couldn't buy it, it was gone. Whereas now the digital shelf is endless. So when I look at our Steam dashboard and I can see, every hour how many we sold of whatever it is and in different parts of the world, I can look down sort of 50, 60 games, and almost everyone has sold, one or two copies, and it's been out for 4 years, but it pays for lunch. That wasn't possible before, and you're right, it does underpin a publishing company particularly, with the revenue stream that is just sort of constant. It's growing because of new games, and some are obviously falling off the back, but what percentage of your revenues is back, what you call back catalogue? 60%. It's amazing. That wasn't possible in box days. It's gone, and a new box came on the shelf. So that's also helpful for the investors in the UK. They love all that, you know.
What are you most excited about
Me?
for the future?
Yeah. Well, I mean, on a personal front, Catalis, I mean, obviously Curve Games is just, you know, going full swing. I've got a great team. Many of them might have been at Sega before, and they're now with us. John Clark leading the charge. So it's very exciting on that side. And on the other side of Catalis is Testronic, which is, I say, this QA, outsourced QA business, which is just, I mean, we just can't hire quick enough. It's 1,500 people, I think, now at Testronic, and we literally, everywhere from New Orleans to LA to Warsaw, we just can't hire quick enough for the demand that we've got, which is absolutely fantastic. So maybe at some point we might think about coming to this hallowed place and take our shot at it, but not immediately.
And if anyone needs a job, send your CV in to Dominic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's the best way to get into the games industry is to just come in at QA as a games tester. And we actually have a little careers office which will help people move on from that to publishing companies or in other roles. It could be marketing, it could be sales, but the mail room, the way to get in, QA.
Fascinating. Brian, what's exciting you?
Well, we are certainly happy and excited and wonderful to see that the indie games, so, you know, as these guys have been saying, that the big AAA titles like Richard's, like Grand Theft Auto and so forth, have really made a large market, made the market globally, and we're seeing creativity and artistry and quirkiness, things are becoming more and more valued around the world and are having better financial metrics, or having better kind of penetration with users and so forth, and we're seeing this indie kind of movement, if you like, getting kind of stronger and stronger, which is super exciting for us. And we love the idea that if we can help be a protector of that or encourager of that or a place for that, then that's our future. Like, so we love the idea that that an artistic game like Gris or something is celebrated, or, you know, I think incredibly so a game of the year, you know, Inscription is so weird and it's so fun that you plan to play it and you're not really sure kind of what happened, and it's gone hugely successful around the world, and again it's up for BAFTAs and all sorts of things. So I think that's what we love that future, indie.
Super. Ranjani?
I'm going to give a really boring answer. I'm very, very excited for the future of monetization models in the games industry, because initially, you know, we've had the traditional models of in-app purchases on mobiles and DLCs and selling content and things like that. And what do you do with an existing game and make more revenue out of it? You know, boxed products, merchandise, all of those things.
And keep parents happy in the
process.
process.
Yeah, exactly. But now we're seeing, you know, consoles like Sony, like PlayStation and Xbox becoming content providers more than just hardware providers. We're seeing companies looking to expand their collections of IPs by just swallowing up and buying other companies instead of, creating more, because they're like, we need to broaden our catalog and we need to figure out new ways of creating money. We have the publisher and funding model that has evolved over time, but there is a new generation of developers who want to maintain control and who want to do self-publishing, but still find funding somewhere. And that is all looking towards a future of the Netflixization of content to a certain extent, like new subscription options, new types of products that involve games and game IPs, but aren't necessarily just involved in the game experience itself. The, dare I say it, the metaverse. There are just lots of different ideas just being thrown against a wall to see what will stick. And I really wish I could fast forward 5 years to see what actually does stick.
Is there room for in-game advertising in that?
Absolutely. Like, that is, I think, seen as a very mobile-specific model, but the truth is, ultimately, your game is getting the eyeballs of consumers, and the attention economy is what everybody is fighting for nowadays. And products are going to be fighting for brand space in, a room in a game that a player spends the most amount of time in. And the metaverse, whether you like it or not, and headset experiences for the future with VR. So yes.
What a great segue to Hiro Capital and everything you're doing, Surya.
Yeah, well, I'm excited for wearing my Hiro hat. Obviously, we raised our first fund very successfully,
Congratulations.
deployed the capital into 21 companies, and we're in the process of raising Hiro Fund 2, which is going to be a 300 million euro fund, and we also placed on LSE Hiro Metaverse Acquisitions, our SPAC, and now we're looking for a target company to reverse into our SPAC. So that's quite exciting. We're the second one on the LSE. There's some 400 in the US, so we're delighted to get it away, particularly in a week that was being pretty hit hard by tech stocks going down, and we were massively oversubscribed. So I think people are understanding again the value of the games industry and the opportunities that are out there. So from a personal point of view, I'm like Brian, I'm very excited about the indie game space. There's always incredible innovation and stuff to get you very excited about. Clearly, Hiro is excited about the metaverse. I mean, people start talking about it perhaps too much these days. But I mean, Hiro is named actually after the hero protagonist in the book Snow Crash, which effectively invented the metaverse. So we are excited by these digital worlds where you can not just play together but exist together. I mean, you've seen how the Travis Scott concert had like 10 million concurrent people watching this amazing concert inside a games world, and of course now connected through VR headsets. You can not just play together, hang out together, and people will be transacting together and building stuff together. So no one really knows what it's going to be yet. It's going to be 10 years down the line before it's fully matured into whatever it will become. But you know for sure that the game industry is going to be front and center of that world creation and the ongoing connectivity of humankind. But as long as it plays to us as human beings, people will be there. I mean, it's the bridging of the physical and the digital worlds together, and it's not going to be at the expense of each other, but it's going to be a great opportunity for I think for the next computing platform and Web3 will be building these worlds, and it's the new future of digital for sure.
Well, you build it and we will come. Richard.
Yeah, I echo all that. I think you've got the biggest entertainment market in the world being funded by some of the biggest technology businesses in the world. This idea that TV and games need to be mutually exclusive. I just think all the kind of entertainment mediums are coming together at the minute. The opportunity for M&A, mergers, acquisitions, for IPOs, it's just huge, and it's only growing. And if we look at the trends over the last few years, if I think back, if I really came into this industry 4 or 5 years ago, all the technological advances in that short amount of time, you don't even realise it. Things like cross-platform play that's just become mainstream in a relatively short amount of time. Digital is now the biggest download media. It's now the biggest way to consume content. These are all milestones that have happened very, very recently and will only continue to kind of feature more in people's day-to-day lives going forward. And so I kind of operate, well, I head up the gaming team at Zeus. I also work with digital media businesses, I work with kind of e-commerce businesses as well. And they're all just looking for engagement. That is fundamentally what when I said they, advertisers, businesses want, the people that are providing capital, it's how do you engage with the people that are going to spend money and understand what they want. And gaming just gives you that access to the individual like nothing else. So, yeah, next 10 years is as you said, I just love to be in 2030 right now, to see how we're all interacting with each other, because it definitely won't be as we are now, that's for sure.
But just put down on Ian's point of Hiro Capital, like London Ventures, it's very specifically aiming at the games market. So if there are people out there watching and they want sort of quasi venture capital, that's where I'd go. I wouldn't necessarily go to the classic VCs. That's actually my point. But you're a specialist fund, and you one target market, and you know all about that market, and that's a different play to get people to the next step. That's just an advertisement for Ian's. Sir.
Thank you, Dominic.
Dominic, there's some truth in that.
Here's a shilling
right?
for you.
Thank you.
I think a lot of VCs will agree with you in that, Dominic, because I think some operators make the best investors, right? You take people like Reid Hoffman, who's built and scaled PayPal and LinkedIn, and he probably tell you the same sort of thing. So you're not wrong when it comes to games.
Well, the thing about Hiro is we're all ex-entrepreneurs as general partners, and so we bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise to any potential investee company, and we have people in our company that they're specialist tech, specialist free to play, specialist blockchain, a big black book of being able to open and give contacts to, and great relationships with money, and also great relationships with strategics who might be interested in our portfolio. So it's much more than money that we offer to our portfolio companies.
I wanted to offer just one other thought on the future. When you saw, you may know, I was with the Tate for about 9 years or so as a non-exec or as a trustee, and I headed up the digital committee. And over that period, every year I kept using game language, user acquisition, retention, monetization, I kept saying it all the time. And then by the 9th year, when my terms were finally over, I think actually it ended up being about 11 years. I did 11 years at the Tate. By the end, I was sitting in a meeting, and one of the directors of the Tate was talking about how the idea of having the fifth gallery. So you have the Tate Modern, the Tate Britain, the Tate St. Ives, the Tate Liverpool, and then Tate Digital as the fifth gallery, getting as much love as that. And promoting that gallery through acquisition, retention, monetization, like the kind of words that the group of us here are like, of course, games. And as I was leaving, I was listening to the directors say, well, what we need to do, we need to identify our audience, engage our audience, retain our audience, and monetize. I was just like, she got there. Like, we did it. It only took 11 years, but it got there. And I think that I see a lot of future crossover for that. I see future crossover not just in the cultural sector, but in other sectors, and where you think, it's a marketing ABC, right? Find your audience, engage that audience, retain that audience. Like, it's kind of, and the games industry is educating a lot of other sectors in those kinds of styles of media. And as some of the guys have been saying about the users now, like Dominic saying about Gen Z and so forth, people, that's how they consume media now. That's kind of who they are. So we need to go find them where they are, engage with them, retain them, monetize them. So the cultural sector got there, and it took 11 years of me saying it, but it got there.
Dominic, top tips for your younger self or young people building gaming companies today?
Oh, well, to my young self, my regret was that I didn't really understand the sort of the corporate side of life well enough. And when I floated the company, I reversed actually into a shell. I didn't do it properly, and I regret that. I think we could have structured it a lot better. So my advice to anybody out there is get advice for any transaction that you make. Get a corporate financier to look it over. In fact, I have a son who is starting a corporate broking company, and I've just my lawyer's been ringing me furiously because he wants to make sure that the deal that he's putting together with the backers is correct for him as an entrepreneur. So that would be my advice: get corporate finance advice for any deal, any money that you take, even if it's from Sir Ian Livingstone, who's of impeccable credentials and unblemished career. Nevertheless, I would get a lawyer and a corporate finance advisor like Zeus.
Thank you. Brian?
So my younger self is maybe different from other younger selves in the sense that I've done quite a bit of mentoring recently with some kind of young lawyers, people maybe who didn't have the kind of easier access that I had kind of back in the day. And I'm encouraging them in two ways. First, to embrace the concept that they have all the skills they need to succeed. So they may not have the knowledge yet, but they are possessed of the qualities and the skills that they need, and if they have to believe in themselves in that context. So maybe to younger people, I would say you may not have the knowledge yet, or it might be somewhat frightening, and you may not know all these monetization strategies, you may not know the investment landscape, but you have the skills inherently already to do that. You already have the kind of drive and the understanding. And then the second thing that I mentor these kind of younger lawyers is on becoming, earlier perhaps than I did, more of a subject matter expert, so that you have a saleable thing. So if you are in the sustainability game, or if there's an interest that you have, to begin to gravitate your career a bit earlier than I did in knowing a subject and going deep into a subject that can give you a better brand, if you like, because I think there, like the metaverse and things, there's an increase in people and investors and large firms and companies having a desire to look at a person or a job with a particular skill set, but also with a brand, and thinking, okay, well, does she know this particular area well? Can she speak intelligently this area well? So I encourage those two things, and I think what I did is I was a real generalist. You know, I've got a couple different kind of degrees and so forth, and I came in as a generalist and then gradually focused on games kind of over time. And I think I would encourage, I think now it's slightly different. I think people can become a bit more specialized, if you like, or deep dive earlier in their careers.
Thank you. Ranjani?
My younger self was a securities trader
Yeah.
that played games, so my advice to her would be step over to the other industry faster. But general advice to younger people starting out in games and starting their companies nowadays is find your local community, your local industry. Like especially in the UK, there are so many initiatives now to foster the local games industry. So I think the idea is find the gamers around you and start your companies with the people you know and have met and have been in it for a while. Secondly, start doing small little games that you put out, because the more you build, the more confidence you get, and the more confidence other people will have in you delivering a successful next game. And that is how you get people to invest in you. And then finally, ask for more money when you're actually asking for money. I think especially in the UK, we're just embarrassed to talk about money. And we're just really, really shy about saying that's an okay amount, but can you actually pay me more because I deserve more? I think those kinds of negotiation skills are really what people come to Robot Teddy, our consultancy, for. And I think my biggest piece of advice is basically, you are worth more, ask for more.
Great advice. Ian?
I think top tip is don't be afraid of failure. Failure is just success, work in progress. You know, take your learnings, fail fast, and move on. Hire the best people. Understand your own strengths, but also your own weaknesses. A lot of games companies are run by creative people, but the best teams I've invested in is where the creative person is on an equal footing with someone who runs the business, so they enable each other to be successful. And take investment. You know, a VC perhaps from Hiro that help you scale your business, not having to kind of bootstrap everything and not being able to hire the best people to give you enough time to execute, enough runway to be able to do that, release that game as it should be, and was in your original vision, and not having to trade away your intellectual property for project finance or whatever, and don't sell out too early. You know, take that investment so you don't have to sell out. You know, I sold out Games Workshop in 1991. It was difficult to get capital in those days. Some might say I sold out a little bit early. It's now worth 3 billion quid. The only consolation is I only owned half of it. But seriously, you know, there are so many things around data and technology and partnerships, and there are so many lessons that games companies should learn before they try and launch. And you know, I think we as a group would always be happy to give help and information wherever it's required. You know, it's a great British success story, and it's our duty to make sure the next generation succeed equally as well.
Thank you. Richard?
What I love about this industry is everyone seems to know everyone, and it's but in a really collegiate way. There doesn't feel like competition in the industry at all. Everyone just genuinely wants everyone to benefit. That's been a real kind of refreshing experience for me, kind of getting into this industry over the last few years. And I would say try and find someone that you can ask for advice. Not me. I mean, Zeus could happily give you the corporate finance advice, but find a mentor, find someone that's kind of been there or been in that industry, has done the deals ahead of you, that you can kind of leverage some of their experience from, because I think everyone is willing to bring that next generation through, and there's just so many willing people to help. But to the point earlier, it's actually British people tend not to ask for help. It tends or they don't know how to go about it. I think having a non-exec on the board that's been involved in the industry, or it doesn't even have to be in gaming, it could be another part of digital or just another complementary sector that's raised money, or that's a neutral voice that isn't necessarily emotionally engaged in the process of building the business, but it can actually be a bit more kind of stand back and take a view on things. Having that voice to kind of communicate with, I think is really important, and the best businesses I've worked with have had really good non-execs from the start.
Well, Thank you very much, Dominic, Brian, Ranjani, Sarian, and Richard for joining us in the studio today. We're fortunate to have such a great community in the games industry, and don't hesitate to reach out to us over LinkedIn, Twitter, including me at the London Stock Exchange, if we can help any one of you. Thank you.